Welcome back. Time now for our business update with Rofio Mazera joining us this evening. So, Rofio, the State of the Nation address definitely tomorrow. All eyes on the president. But what can he say to bolster some confidence?
That is the big question, isn't it, Dumelo? What we're seeing here is that President Cyril Ramaphosa will be delivering that much-anticipated State of the Nation address, and every household and business in the country will be listening out for his key priorities and his commitment to remedying the energy crisis, Transnet, and social welfare issues that persist. Director and Chief Economist at Econometrics, Dr. Azar Jameen, joins us this evening to unpack this and more. A very good evening to you, Dr. Jameen, and I suppose that is the big question that everyone is wondering at the moment, particularly those in the economic circles within South Africa, is that what is it that the President can say in his State of the Nation address that can encourage any kind of confidence in the current state of affairs?
You know, I myself have been having difficulty in trying to ascertain what he can really say to provide confidence, because part of the problem is that, in a way, he has been crying wolf for many, many years. His State of the Nation addresses in the past have been very impressive. He has outlined a whole host of things that need to be done to get this economy right, how to improve service delivery. He has outlined an analysis of the problems facing the country, and that has given people a lot of confidence. But it's happened year after year after year, and now we find ourselves back in probably an even more ominous situation than before, especially as far as energy goes, especially as far as the deterioration of the transport network, as you indicated. And so people are now highly skeptical and frustrated and actually very annoyed at the lack of implementation. One appreciates that the president is caught within his own party, within factional battles, and he's trying to sustain unity of the party. But the man in the street is getting frustrated and saying, yes, but, you know, does that take precedence over my personal well-being? And the answer is, you know, I'm fed up with hearing all these promises and and then seeing an absence of delivery. So this is the dilemma that one faces, and one doesn't know what now, at this late stage, Ramaphosa can say to actually regenerate the confidence that is needed.
I suppose that regeneration, Doc, would come from the actual implementation that you refer to. Surely there should be some form of urgency within the government ranks to implement some of these things that he said, as you correctly point out, for a number of years now in his various speeches. And it would seem that that urgency still does not exist despite the deterioration that we've come to, particularly with the energy crisis and our companies up in arms saying we are losing billions in export opportunities because the rail networks are just no longer working for them. Why don't we see that sense of urgency just yet, Doc?
I do think we're seeing a sense of urgency, but the fact is that whether we see a sense of urgency or not, the fact remains that we are not seeing implementation of resolutions to these problems. They just keep getting worse and worse. And this is where the disillusionment comes in. And so whatever Ramaphosa says tomorrow, and I'm sure it will be a very impressive speech once again, but people this time round will say, so what? How do we believe you? Because you've said a lot of these things in the past, and we have seen none of the resolutions coming to fruition. So this is the dilemma that I think Ramaphosa faces tomorrow. And frankly, I find I myself can't work out, if I was in his place, what would I do and what would I say to encourage confidence? Because the wolf has cried too often now, and people are not believing it anymore.
Another spanner that's now been thrown in the works, Doc, is SARS flagging that revenue collection might be lower this year simply because of the impact of load shedding, constrained consumers not spending as much, so VAT falling short, and then, of course, people trying to avoid paying taxes because they just don't have that disposable income anymore. And then the president will also have to think of the fact that there's a social relief grant that he has extended for the past few years, and one wonders how will he navigate that space, the social welfare space, when the tax collector is saying we might just not have the necessary funds in this fiscal year.
You're absolutely correct, and I think Kieswetter is absolutely correct in highlighting all those problems in terms of tax revenues. And then on the other side, you're highlighting the fact that there are some expenditure prerequisites, including extending the special social grant, which I don't think the government can actually escape from doing that. And the question is, where will you find the money to do so? And that raises the threat that after all, the budget deficit will have to increase and public debt will escalate. And this afternoon, we've seen a fairly sharp further depreciation in the rand, which may be a reflection of this, although there is another big factor that has not attracted much attention, and that has been the collapse in the price of coal in the last few weeks. And, we've been benefiting a lot from coal exports and the profits that coal mining companies have been making, upon which they've been paying a lot of tax. And that seems to be turning around for the negative now as well. So, at the end of the day, you've got a situation where low growth in the economy, partly due to load shedding and inept state-owned enterprises and the poor management thereof, and all the associated problems of sabotage and state capture that have actually impaired those state-owned enterprises. We end up with low growth. That in turn equals low tax revenue collections, which in turn equals a need either to cut back on expenditure or to borrow still more, with the concomitant implications of an increase in interest having to be paid on the rise in the resultant debt emanating from having to borrow more. It's not a pretty picture, and we're going further and further into difficulties as a country as a consequence of this spiral. And this spiral has been in place now for the better part of 10 years. Right up until 2013, South Africa's economic fortunes were closely correlated with those of the rest of the world. Since then, if you look at the graphs, we've been progressively underperforming the rest of the world. And it's in no small measure due to the lagged effects of state capture and the shift of resources away from the vital areas of the economy towards the pockets of connected individuals.
And then just a final thought from you, Doc. Do we anticipate that he might mention anything about the grey listing that is looming, that decision that is set to be made by the Financial Task Force later on in February? We did see some policies come through in December, but do we anticipate him to make any further policy pronouncements so that we can stave off that grey listing or not?
You're quite right in highlighting that as a potential huge problem. In fact, that I have wondered, but I haven't seen anything in the news as to whether there's been some indication of that happening as to why the rand has fallen suddenly quite so sharply this afternoon. But yes, I would hope that he would actually raise the issue of grey listing. Otherwise, it will leave a gap in that SONA speech that people will immediately latch onto.
Thank you very much for your time. That is the Director and Chief Economist at Econometrics, Dr. Azar Jamin, joining us for that discussion on what the President should prioritise in his State of the Nation address. Dumela, very important insights there coming in from the doc. And of course, in the next hour, we will reflect further on what SARS is warning in terms of tax revenue. If the Finance Ministry doesn't have the money, we've got big problems as a country.
Absolutely. Also hearing from SAFTU's General Secretary, Mavavi, calling for the top earners, the country's 1%, to be taxed more. And that didn't land quite well with those earners as well, saying, listen, the money's already been misused with previous taxes that have been paid. How do we know that this time around it will go to good use? But we'll find out from SARS, as you mentioned, Rofhiwa, in the next hour.